to anything that I would talk on. Our boss is Mr. Daniel Chojnacki, who is unfortunately not able to join us today, so he will miss the undoubtful joy of giving this short lecture today. The agenda, what we will talk about. First thing, the regulatory background, because the deposit refund system is not something entirely new. It's a little addition to the system that already exists and to the system that will be reformed in the following years. So it's not my point to go through all the obligations and all the changes, but it is necessary to understand more or less how the things work right now in order to properly understand the new system. Then we will go to the system itself. One short remark. Right now we are talking about a legislative bill, which is at the final stage of the governmental process. It will probably be accepted by the Council of Ministers in the following weeks, and then it would have to undergo the parliamentary stage. So we are not talking about the final act or even the final draft. Changes will happen. However, it's reasonable to assume that they will not be revolutionary, and they will not necessarily come into force on the 1st of January, but I will elaborate on that. So we will talk about the general model, how these things should work, and then we will focus on the things that are probably the most interesting to you, which is who will be affected and how will they be affected. And final remarks, the entry into force, because here the idea of when the obligations will apply is surprisingly complicated, and we will need a few moments on that. And we will try to share with you our suggestions and recommendations. I think we have about 2 hours for this lecture. I think we will go a little faster. So it's possible for us to have a break, but we will see just how the time flows. One issue, if you have questions regarding what I am currently saying, please ask them on the fly. If you have a little more complex questions or questions regarding your general overview of the system, please wait for the end of the presentation, because maybe the answer to your questions is on the next slide. So that's all the introductory to our lecture. So how things work right now. The most important thing here is the definition of placing products on the market. Why? Because if you are covered by the current definition, you may or may not be affected by the deposit refund scheme. If you do not fall into the definition, it is basically not your problem. So, placing products on the market is any supply of a product for distribution or use in the course of a commercial activity, whether in return for payment or free of charge for the first time within the territory of a member state. Which sounds complicated, but it's not as complicated. So the idea is that what counts is the first passing of a product within the Polish borders. If I am an entity in Poland who produces something in packaging or who imports something in packaging, I am an entity placing products on the market and I have some obligations. There are some extra rules. Running a retail unit of a certain area and selling products packets in the unit counts. Packing products manufactured by another entrepreneur and placing them on the market counts. and placing on the market products manufactured by another entity under one's own name or trademark accounts. What does it mean? It means that, for example, if I have a business that runs retail shops and I want to sell mineral water with the logo of my retail shop on it, I am treated like I am the one responsible for all the obligations. I don't know if any of you listeners may be affected by that. If yes, well, please let me know. The thing is, it's not entirely sure how this rule about the own logos apply to the deposit refund scheme, but it may not affect all of you. And this is something that will probably be clarified on the further steps on the legislative procedure. So that's the general rule. And then there is the transboundary dilemma, which is basically, can a foreign entity be an entity placing products on the market? And the problem is that the Polish Act is far from clarity on that. So basically, what we do in practice is we use the frequently asked questions published by the European Commission on the similar directives as the one for the packaging. And the EU Commission basically says that the deciding factor is who owns the product when it crosses the border. So it's not certain that if you're not a Polish entity, you are not covered by these obligations. However, I have not met one court ruling which would make a problem with that. So my understanding of the authorities' approach is that someone has to fulfill the obligations. If there is Italian, for example, mother company, and there is a daughter company in Poland, and they pass products to one another, what seems the most important from the perspective of the authorities, that one of them takes the responsibility for the product. They would probably prefer the Polish one, as it is easier to impose any obligations on someone who is already here. But they would probably not make a big deal of choosing the Italian mother company. So that's the general rule. It is basically safer to have a Polish company who will fulfill the obligations. However, we made quite a lot of work in understanding the supply chains of multinational companies and taking into considerations all the factors in a single case, deciding who should register. If you have a problem with that, we are, of course, more than welcome to support you. And there is the de minimis derogation, which means that when the mass of packaging that you put on the market is less than 1 megagram, 1 ton, 1,000 kilograms, and you file the respective application no later than 15th of March each year, the most of the obligations do not apply to you. Why is that important? It's important because it also applies to the deposit refund scheme. It will apply. So now, what are the current obligations of entities placing products on the market? Again, if you have doubts on whether the deposit refund scheme will apply to you or not, you first should answer yourself, do these obligations refer to you? They are not that complex. They include meeting the general, quite liberal criteria for packaging, which basically means, for example, that you cannot use lead in food packaging, which is not something very surprising. So there's not much philosophy in that. You have to be entered into the waste database. You have to pay the registration fee. It's about 100 or 300 zlotys, depending on the entity, and you should pay the annual registration fee, because if you don't do that, you may be crossed out of the database, and we would not like that. You have to place the registration number on the documents related to said activity, for example, on invoices. This is something, just please do take notes on that, because it's not all the entities affected know about these obligations, and they definitely should. So you get entered into the waste database, you get your number, you place your number on invoices. In case of all the distributors in Poland, you can sell products only placed on the market by someone who is registered in the waste database. Will it be yourself? Will it be someone else? It's okay. But if you sell products from someone who is not registered in the database, you may potentially have a problem if the authorities will catch you, which may not necessarily happen, but still we would like to eliminate the risk if that's possible. And you have to keep records on the weight of packaging used in a given calendar year. So that these are the formal obligations, and there is the general idea of why you have to do that. Because the entities placing products on the markets are obliged to meet the specified levels of recycling of waste packaging of the same type as the packaging used. Which basically means that if in a given year I sell, for example, 1,000 tons of mineral water, in the same year I have to pay for the recycling of, let's say, 400 tons of mineral water. I'm not concerned with my own waste, but with the waste that is generated by the customers who have bought my products. You have to conduct public educational campaigns, and you have to submit an annual report on how you've met those requirements. How you do that in practice is you sign a contract with a recovery organization who does these things for you for some remuneration. There are some more complicated rules for hazardous and composite multi-material packaging, and for the retail trade units, well, mostly the collecting of a recycling fee for plastic shopping bags, but they are not the subject of today's presentation. So that's basically what happens right now. And if any of you has any doubts whether these obligations apply to them, it's a good moment to try to solve those issues. Yeah.
Isn't this a double taxation, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, well, technically it's not a taxation, it's a fee whatsoever, but it is something that you have to pay when you put products on the market. And now we are entering the age of reform. Because what we have right now, it's a double taxation, but you pay a little. The general idea is that in a few years, you should pay a lot. This results from the circular economy package. These are 4 directives adopted by the EU in 2018. And what do they say? Well, these are all quite complex acts, but the most important part is Article 8A, point 4 of the Waste Directive, the new one. It says, member states shall take the necessary measures to ensure that the financial contributions paid by the producer of the product to comply with its extended producer responsibility obligation cover of separate collection of waste and its subsequent transport and treatment, including treatment necessary to meet the Union waste management targets and costs necessary to meet other targets and objectives, taking into account the revenues from reuse, from sales of secondary raw materials from its products, and from unclaimed deposit fees. Said costs shall not exceed the costs that are necessary to provide waste management services in a cost-efficient way. Such costs shall be established in a transparent way between the actors concerned. So yeah, it's written in EU legal language, which is far from fun to read. But the general idea is, as I've already mentioned, right now, when you sell products, you have to make a small financial donation, basically by paying the recovery organization, who then distributes the money between waste management actors, such as waste collectors and recyclers whatsoever. The problem is that it's a small part of all the costs. So what should be done and what will be done sooner or later in Poland is that the ministry is quite determined to make these costs real, which basically means that it's not just some abstract dotation, but there should be costs that basically refer to how much it actually costs to get the waste from the trash bin and do something useful with them. And as far as I know, that's more or less how it already works in Czech Republic, in Sweden, in quite a lot of EU countries, and also the ministry refers to these examples. So the main idea of the Polish ministry is to make sure that the producers or the importers pay more or less as much as they do in Czech Republic right now. So that's the whole philosophy. But this is the general reform. And part of that EU reform is the Single-Use Plastics Directive. You may be aware of that. The idea of the directive is that some EU commissioners, or probably some lower level employees, went to the European beaches, tried to find some waste, tried to classify this waste, try to define what types of waste are the most popular on European beaches, and then to figure out what to do with them. So there are about 10 types of products, such as plastic cotton bags, such as wet wipe tissues, such as the plastic holders to the balloons, whatsoever. They are divided into a few categories, and the restrictions are imposed on each of them. So basically, if you, for example, produce or import cotton buds, you are already aware of that. If you do not, you probably heard about it, but it's not much of your concern. Yes, but there is one requirement, and this is the whole idea of the deposit refund scheme, because the SUP directive says that member states should ensure separate collection rates for beverage bottles, for plastic beverage bottles. It's 77% in 2025, and it's 90% in 2030. And in order to achieve that, member states may, inter alia, establish a deposit refund schemes. So basically, and there's another quite important requirement, that beverage bottles from, I will not even try to read that, but it's PET, in 2025 should contain at least 25% of recycled plastic, calculated as an average for all PET bottles placed on the market on the territory of that member state, and at least 30% in 2030. I use the whole phrase because it's not that each and every bottle should contain 30% of recycled plastic, but 30% of all mass of the packaging that you produce or import. And if you go to the shop, you can already notice that such bottles are being present there. They are a little thicker and a little grayish or bluish, but it's recognizable, and this already happens. So that's what the EU law demands. And the whole idea of the Polish deposit refund scheme is to make sure that these separate collection rates are achieved and that there is enough recycled plastics for the producers to meet the requirements of their containment in the new bottles. So that's the EU level. How it works on the national level. First, we have the Extended Producer Responsibility Act, which is a big thing, because that's the act which basically says that you have to pay 10 times more or even 50 times more for the recycling of waste from your products. But the first draft was published on the 5th of September 2021, and nothing happened since then. Because in March, there was there were press comments from the government officials that there is a necessity to avoid measures that may result in inflation increase and that the further steps depend on the political decision. So this is a big thing that should have already happened, but it's not happening because inflation and because there are elections next year. So it's quite possible that we will not see the final act soon. And because the declared entry into force is also the 1st of January 2023, but it won't happen. Yeah, and that's it. So you should be aware that something like that exists, that it will be a huge topic in some time, but it's not a huge topic now. There are some reforms to the current extended producer responsibility scheme, which basically means that, yes, now it's triple taxation. Right now, you just pay for to the recovery organization. If the act comes into force in a form that it is right now, you will have to pay to the recovery organization, and you will have to pay an extra fee for households packaging to the authorities, which is quite strange, and I do hope that they will change the mechanisms, but it's not important right now. But what is important is that fee rates, both the remuneration to the recovery organization and the fee that is paid to the authorities, should promote eco-modulation. And the draft more or less says what is eco-modulation and what should be promoted and what should not be promoted. And there are already some government papers that can be found with their general idea that, for example, black packaging should be more expensive than the transparent one. That there is something like over-packaging, which should also result in higher fees. The materials, the composite materials are, of course, less fun than the reasonable single material ones. So right now, the main reason why I mentioned that is that it may be a good moment to start checking if there are more ecologically reasonable alternatives to the packaging that you use right now, because this is something that will result in a very real costs in a few years. And there's also an obligation to label the packaging with an indication of the proper selective collection of waste, which basically means that plastic bottles should have some yellow square to make sure that everyone knows that those should be put into the yellow container. But again, it was something that was quite, there was a hot debate on that in September 2029, but right now it seems that this obligation will not come into force any soon. Still, this is something that you should be aware of, because sooner or later it will come into force in this shape or in another shape, and it will generate costs. So we have quite a lot of time to prepare for that, but still this time should be wisely used. Then there is a Single-Use Plastic Act. It's another draft. It was published in April 2021. It is on the final stage of the legislative works, which basically means that it should be accepted by the Council of Ministers in the following weeks. It will enter into force in 14 days from the promulgation dates, with most obligations applying from the 1st of January 2023. And this is basically rewriting of the SUP directive on the plastic cotton bags, plastic balloon holders, whatsoever. And as I said, the bill divides single-use plastic products, in particular food packaging, into several groups, which, depending on their classification, are subject to market restrictions, labeling obligations, product fee, catering fee, or obligation to finance educational campaigns. If you sell food in packaging, this is something that might be worth investigating. Still, it's not the subject of our today's presentation, but please be aware that something like that exists. And again, if you have any further questions, we will be happy to answer them. There is one strange issue because the works on these acts went far more smoothly than on the deposit refund scheme. So there are some provisions in the SUP Acts on the deposit refund scheme, but they are very general. They are quite strange. I would say they are temporary, because I think the idea is that to show the European Union that we are doing something within the time frame. So just please let us go and let us focus on really deciding how the deposit refund scheme should work. And this is my general idea. But there are some provisions that are quite likely to be introduced by this act. Okay, this might be a little digression. And now the fun part, which is the Deposit Refund Scheme Act, where we are. The first draft was published at the end of January this year. There was quite a lot of remarks from the public, from other authorities, and some of them were included, some of them were not. The most recent draft was published in October 2022, so not so long ago, last month. And again, we are at the final stage of governmental legislative works. I think that the European Committee has already made its remarks. It's quite possible that the project will have to be notified to the European Commission, so it will also take some time. Now, it will have to be approved by the Council of Ministers, which will happen, and it will happen very soon. And then it will have to go through the Parliament. Right now, as you may have already noticed, the Polish Parliament is on, let's say, friendly relationships with the government. So if a minister or a representative of the ministry comes to the parliamentary commission, they may have an argument with the representatives of the trades, of the producers whatsoever. They will probably listen to their remarks, and they may include some. But the members of the parliaments, well, basically they do not, or they very rarely oppose the government officials. So as soon as the ministry decides that the project is ready, getting this through the lower chamber would go quite smoothly. The upper chamber may make some problems, but the lower chamber will get its will done. Long digression, but the moral of the story is that the Council of the Ministers will approve the drafts in the following days or weeks, and then we will need a few weeks, probably a few weeks, in the parliaments to get the final act. And the planned entry into force is from early 2023 to 2025. And as I said, it's quite complex, and I will elaborate on that. The general idea is that formally it is likely to get into force in early 2023, not necessarily the 1st of January, because, well, they are late with their proceedings. I'm checking the time. I think if you would just excuse me, I will get a glass of water, and we will get to the even more fun part on how this whole thing will work. Tim and Claudia, do you have any comments? So far, no. So just please let me, and I will be back. Just right. And maybe to our participants, are there any questions to what I've said so far? If there are not, so please let me continue.
Maybe I have a question.
Yeah.
Legislation is going to affect all kind of bottles? I mean, despite what is inside?
We will go to that in a minute. So first we will talk about the general idea of the system, and then we will go to, well, who will be affected and how. So there already are deposit refund schemes in Europe. There are two main models. First one is Scandinavian, and this one applies in most of the EU countries that's introduced something like that, which means that there is one central operator, and this operator is usually controlled by trade organizations. For example, that's some organization of the producers have 50% of the shares, and some organization of the detail traders have another 50%. That's how it usually works, but not everywhere. There is a quad version, which means where there is one single operation, but it's controlled by the public authorities. And there is an alternative, which is a German version with multiple competitive operators and one coordinating body. The Polish version will be heavily based on that, but there is no notion of the coordinating body. So, but that is a practical issue. The main conclusion of that is that if you wonder how more or less the system will work, the system will work more or less the way that it works in Germany today. So there will be a few competitive operators. Each of them should cover the national territory. In the previous version of the project, it said that it should cover the whole national territory. Now they crossed it out. I'm not sure if I understand why. I would just, it's my guess to not be too picky, not go into too much detail. So I would say that it should just cover more or less the whole national territory. Each of the operator and each of the systems should ensure universal and equal access for end users. It should ensure universal and equal access for entities placing packaged beverages on the market, for retailers and for wholesalers. And it should not require presenting a receipt while returning the empty packaging or packaging waste. The operator does not have to cover all types of packaging in the system, because we'll go to that. There are plastic bottles, there are glass bottles, there are aluminum cans. There can be an operator just for glass bottles. An operator should meet a set of formal requirements, including not for profit activity, which means that they can make profit, but they should use it for financing their operations and making them more efficient whatsoever, and not just make profit for the shareholders. What is the conclusion from that? Well, the general idea is that if you think about becoming an operator, it might not be the best idea, because the operator is, there will not be one operator, but each of the operators should basically act as if he is the only one, which means that he should conclude agreements on equal and universal terms with any shop that is interested, with any importer that is interested, and with any producer that is interested in that. So it's a huge thing to run. And the idea that this access should be universal and equal basically means that if I just import, let's say, 2 tons of peanut butter each year, I should be treated just as the biggest producer in the country, and I should not be forced to pay more, or I should not be less prioritized in any other additional terms. That's more or less how it should work. We'll see what the practice will show. And there's an important thing, which means that an operator must file a detailed application to the Ministry of the Climate and Environment, and he must obtain the permit. So basically, most of the questions on how will the system works can be answered. The operator, the wannabe operator, must himself answer this. He must write it down, pass to the ministry, and ministry will approve or not. There is a lot of unknowns, and there will stay unknowns for quite a long time because the ministry's approach is more or less, we really have no idea how to organize that. We will wait for someone who has money in the game and who will tell us, and we will just let him do it his way, which is not really a stupid approach, but it is something that we need to know right now. There is a lot of unknowns, and they will stay unknown for some time. But what we do know and how it will work. Each entity placing packet beverage on the market, which means that it's the entity that we discussed on the beginning of the presentations, but the one who sells beverages, has to conclude an agreement with an operator, and it has to pay the operator to do his operatory stuff. End user, for example, myself, bring an empty bottle to a shop and I get a deposit return. The important thing, or maybe not so important, is that the draft uses the phrase end user, which is not really the consumer. For example, we as a DZP are not necessarily a consumer. There are quite a lot of water bottles here, which we bought for our business activity, but they will also be covered by the system. So it's just in order to avoid any misconceptions, end user is anyone who buys some beverage to drink it or to let his guests drink it. So end user, myself, I bring an empty bottle to a shop, I get a deposit return. I do not have to show a receipt from the shop. Bottles are collected in the shop, and they are collected from the shop by the operator or by some local company that he contracted. Operator should cover the operational costs, which means the transport of the waste, any costs that the retailers should bear in order to meet the requirements. For example, if they need a reverse vending machine, quite popular in Germany, it should be by the general idea paid by the operator, who is paid by us as the entities placing products on the market. Empty glass bottles are legally owned by the producers, the entities placing products on the market. Other waste, plastic bottles, aluminum cans, is legally owned by the operator himself. Profits from the waste management are used to finance the system, and the main goal of the operator is to meet the collection rates, the 77% in 2025 and the 90% in 2030. And if he fails to meet these collection rates, he should pay the product fee. The 50% of that should be paid by the operator himself, and the other 50% by the entity placing products on the market who contracted that operator. So this is the highest risk in the game, I would say. So that's generally how it will work. And now the most fun part: who will be affected and how will he be affected? First, producers and importers, which are entities placing packed beverages on the market, which are entrepreneurs placing on the market packed beverages that use one of the packaging types listed in the annex to the draft. I bolded the placing on the market because this is something that we've already talked about. If right now I am the one who is obliged to be entered to the waste database and do all the other stuff, I may be covered by the further obligations. There are three types of packaging. First, single-use plastic bottles with a capacity up to 3 liters. I bolded plastic because it is generally understood that we are referring to PET bottles, but it's not written anywhere in the Act. So the obligations may also apply to other types of plastic, such as HDPE. Plastic bottles, including their caps and lids, but not glass or metal beverage containers that have caps and lids made from plastic. It's from the SUP directive. It's basically quite intuitive, right? That's if I have a glass with just a plastic cap, it does not count as a plastic bottle. We could just ignore that because, as I said, it's intuitive, but they wrote that down. Another type of packaging is aluminum cans with a capacity up to 1 liter. Again, it's aluminum cans, not steel cans. This may or may not change in the further works. And the reusable glass bottles with a capacity up to 1.5 liters. And this one is interesting because in the previous version of the drafts, all glass bottles of this capacity were covered. There were probably some producers who were deeply unhappy with that, and they managed to convince the ministry to let it go. So now the bottles are divided to reusable and to non-reusable. And I'm not sure if there is any technical difference. It seems that it's all depends on the decision of the producer. Because right now this is quite popular with beer companies, that they already established some deposit refund schemes for their bottles because they assume that they will make profit of that. And the idea of the ministry is that, okay, we will let you keep it, organize it any way that you want, as long as you meet the general requirements. But we will not force anyone to join you. So if anyone prefers to will not join the scheme, he may just use non-reusable glass bottle and he does not have any problem. So 3 types of materials: plastic, aluminum, and glass. And the definition of beverage. A beverage is a liquid intended for direct consumption without a need for further processing. In particular, water, juice, nectar, milk, yogurt, or other drinking milk products, alcoholic beverages. Direct consumption, I'm partly proud of that because that's a remark that I made in one of the conferences and it was well accepted by the representatives of the ministry. The idea is that there's quite a lot of liquids that are intended for consumption, but you do not drink the stuff. For example, olive oil, right? So olive oil is not intended for direct consumption, and it basically needs further processing. So that is a clarification to not cover something like that, or ketchup, or any other kind of sauce. In particular, water, juice, obvious nectar, milk, yogurt, or other drinking products. This is quite counterintuitive. There were quite a lot of remarks in the legislative process to just cross it out because it makes no sense. But the ministry decided that it is bound by the directive. I personally disagree with that. They are not bound by the directive, and I think that in Germany it's not covered by the deposit refund scheme. So we will see if it would stay or not, but it's counterintuitive, and this is something that should be noted, that dairy products are also covered by the definition of the beverage. And there is a derogation for pharmaceutical and medical products and liquid food for special medical purposes, and these are all terms that are defined in separate acts. So we will not focus on that, but if some of your products might fall into any of these categories, please be sure to look it up or ask us to look it up for you. And there is a derogation for direct placing. I've read it. I did not understand it at all. I've contacted one person working in the ministry who also has no idea what it means. But what I was told is that it's a very small segment of the market. The wording says that direct placing is when I sell bottled products to my clients, and when I sell new products, I collect empty bottles from them of the same type and in the same quantity. And there are some entrepreneurs who work like that, but it seems like a small scale. It seems like, I know, providing some restaurants or something like that with specific brands, and they are treated a little different. And I will not focus on that. However, if you suppose that you might fall into this category, it's also maybe something worth getting deeper into. So this is the theory, and now we will have a fun part of our presentation, because it is a bag of different products, and we will try to divide them into the ones that fall and that do not fall into our categories. Demon, what do you like? Go and try.
All right. Yeah, let's start with wine.
If you could just put in the camera. We
Yeah,
can see
yeah.
That is the camera, I
That's
think.
good.
Right?
Well, it's a glass bottle, but is it a reusable one?
No. Simply no, and that's our answer. It's a beverage, it's in a glass bottle, the bottle is not reusable. We do not care.
Right. Now we have olive.
Yep.
Wow, and it's not intended for direct consumption, as we've already mentioned, so I believe it's outside the scope as well.
Exactly. And it's also in a non-reusable bottle.
All right, now we have milk.
Yeah, vegan milk.
Yeah, vegan milk. Wow. Is it a plastic bottle? It's definitely made of plastic. It is intended for direct consumption, I believe.
Yeah.
Its capacity is it's within 3 liters, it's 1
Yep.
liter. It's a single-use one, so I believe it's in.
Exactly. And the fun part is I specifically chose that one because it's HDPE. It's not a PET bottle. However, it still falls into the system because there is no direct derogation for that. So this one goes in.
Right. Now we have some smearing cream.
Okay, I think I might.
All right. Now we have some smearing cream for sandwiches.
Yep.
Which is in a jar made of glass. It is intended for direct consumption. So I believe it should be within the system.
Jesus Christ, no.
It's not?
It's not, because why not?
It's not a beverage.
It's not a beverage and it's not a bottle. That's all. So no, out of the scope.
All right. Now we have a cream for coffee.
Yeah.
The main question here is whether its purpose is for direct consumption.
Yes, that's a good question, but let's assume it is. It's for let's just imagine that it's a box of milk.
Box of milk. All right. Could we get back to the
Sure.
presentation?
So I'm visible in a small window.
Yeah.
I'm presenting the camera.
So here we should focus on the material.
Yeah,
Because it's neither plastic nor aluminium and nor glass.
exactly. It's a composite. It's a Tetra Pak, and there is a there is an organization of the Tetra Pak producers who try to convince the ministry that this should also be covered by the scope of the system. But the ministry right now refuses to do that. So something like that's also out of the scope.
All right, now we have a bottled water.
Yeah.
Well, it's a plastic bottle. We have a beverage. Water is particularly mentioned in the provision. And it's less than 3 liters. It's a single use one, so it should be in.
That's one quite obvious.
Yeah. Here we have a can of a beer can. And it's an aluminum can with a capacity up to 1 liter, and it's intended for direct consumption. So it's in. What else do we have? Oh, here we have corn. It's also an aluminum can, but it's not a liquid. It's not a beverage.
Exactly, but what it's not a beverage, so it's out of the scope. But I took this one because it's not an aluminum can; it's a steel can. And here it's quite obvious that it's not an aluminum can. However, for the liquids, what I've heard, because I'm not an expert on the technical issues, is that it's perfectly economically feasible and reasonable to make a steel can which looks just like the aluminum ones. And some producers do that. So the way that the provisions of the draft are right now, the aluminum cans are in, steel cans are not in. We'll see if it stays that way. It probably will. So aluminum, yes, steel, no, and corn, obviously no, because it's not liquid and not a beverage.
Here we have an alcoholic beverage in a glass bottle. The question is whether it's reusable.
No, it's not. And that seems to be the biggest issue because it's a typical non-reusable glass bottle that was supposed to be covered by the system in the previous drafts. And there were quite a lot of discussions on that, if it makes sense to cover that or not. It may have some sense, but the decision was that it's not covered.
Which is too small?
No, not really. It's just not reusable. If you would mark it as reusable, and if you decided that you would like to take it back, it would be covered by the system. But there is nothing like too small right here. There is only an upper limit.
So it's one of the changes that occurred during the legislative process. It used to be within the scope. Now it's not. And well, we'll see what the final version is. All right. And here we have 3 bottles of beer, which is definitely a beverage intended for direct consumption, and in glass bottles with a capacity up to 1.5 liters. However, we come back to the reusable
Exactly.
part of the game, and this Maciej has to read because it's probably written in a very small letters on
Exactly.
the etiquette.
And that's the thing. But here you can basically see that it's a non-reusable bottle because it's not really standard, right? It's from my hometown, so it has a stamp with a deer jumping over the something. And it strictly says on the etiquette that it is a non-reusable bottle, which means that it's out of the scope. And here we have 2 same beers. The bottle is a little different, but the fun part is here the etiquette says non-reusable because I bought it in a discount. This one says that the bottle is reusable. I bought it in a small shop. So basically the same bottle of the same products can go within the scope or can go outside of the scope. And I have no idea on the technicalities. It seems to me that the decision is up to the producer because the same bottle may be marked as reusable or non-reusable. And if I put something in glass on the market, I can decide to take it back and to be covered by the deposit refund scheme, or I could simply put a mark which says non-reusable and gets it done with.
Can you point me where is this reusable or not? Reusable?
This one is not reusable. It says here, butelka bezzwrotna.
So it's easy to skip out all the scheme.
Yes, I would say so. Again, for the producers of the beers, it's quite reasonable to just have the deposit refund scheme because glass is expensive, and they just have economical need to get it out of the market.
I have in mind all the importers.
Yes, and if you are an importer and you do not really care that much, just make sure that it says non-reusable bottle. And again, I'm right now. Right now, there are no clear instructions on what is the difference between usable and non-reusable. The reusables usually look like this, or basically they look like that. They are very standard. No extra marking, no fancy shapes whatsoever. So this looks like a perfectly reusable bottle. If we make any additions, if we do a little fancy shape, if we do some stamps with the deer, it looks like a non-reusable. So yes, the general conclusion from that is if you have something in the bottles, right now it seems that you should mark it as non-reusable. And you should just see what happens next with the project, because I cannot exclude that there will be changes on the parliamentary level with regards to that. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. For an importer of wine, for example,
Yeah.
which we stated that it's out of the bill because it's non-reusable bottle. I don't know if it's in the etiquette. There is already this mention, but if not, would you advise to put this non-reusable glass in the etiquette?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Because if
Can be a label, a sticker.
yeah, the thing is, the act does not have any clear provision that says reusable is something, non-reusable is something. It made sense to cover all the glass, like it's reasonable. When they decided to not cover all the glass, it's basically a little voluntary. And I would guess that the authorities will not really make a problem of that. So it's the chances that you will get an environmental inspection if you're a small importer, and the inspector will start to wonder whether this is reusable or non-reusable, I think it's not really likely. But if there is some authority who decides to check if you're okay with everything, let's make sure that he does not have any doubts. Let's just put the sticker, let's say non-reusable bottle, and make it obvious to anyone interested, right? Okay, anything more? Anyone online having any questions?
I would like to ask
What?
Mateusz Brzyniak, Białek.
Okay, someone is talking, but it's really quiet. I'm not sure if I can make it any louder. Maybe. Okay, please try again.
Hello, Mateusz Brzyniak, Białek. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so you were referring to the entities placing packaged beverages when discussing who will be affected. But I would like just to make sure, I would like to ask whether the producers of glass packaging will be anyhow affected by this, could be anyhow affected by this bill.
They should not. Yeah, they should not, because we are. There are already some obligations on entities placing packaging on the market, right? And they will not really change. The focus is on the ones placing packed products on the market. So the one who gets the packaging puts something inside and sells it to other entities. I will just take a look at the basic definition. And yeah, well, even taking into consideration my doubts on packing products manufactured by other entrepreneur and placing them on the markets, I don't think it's really something that happens with bottles or with products covered by the deposit refund scheme. And placing on the market products manufactured by another entity under owns name or trademark, well, whether this one applies to deposit refund scheme or not, it's the producer of something that is inside, not the producer of the bottle itself. So I would say that you are not producer placing packed beverages on the market because it's a different category. You may be affected indirectly. Do you use glass or plastics or aluminum?
Glass.
Glass.
Mhm.
Okay, so it should not be a big deal for you, because again, with plastics, the producers of the product will be interested in using bottles that have a certain percentage of recycled material in it, but it's for plastics. The general idea is to make it a reasonable economic decision to use recycled material and to make sure that this recycled material is really something valuable and not waste, not just in a name, but in its price. So you may be indirectly affected by the prices of recycled glass, for example, or I don't know how stłuczka szklana should be in English. Any of you has an idea? Okay, so just the thing that's when you break the bottle and make it prepared for further, the glass prepared for further use. When the system comes into force, it may affect the price of this reused glass, but you would not be directly affected as an entity under administrative obligations. That's my idea. If any of you have other thoughts, okay. None of my colleagues have other thoughts, so I think we are clear on that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anything else? If not, we could make a break or we could not make a break. I think there's not so many of us. So, Alfio, you have any thoughts on making a break or not?
10 minutes, maybe we can have a coffee.
Okay, so let's have a 10 minutes break. No. Okay.
¿Hay miembros de la Cámara?
Sí. Sí,
Sapete il palinsesto di questo studio? Abbiamo organizzato nostri incontri che si occupano di distribuzione essenzialmente
infatti io oggi è venuto da me, la metà di testa, sta parlando con no?
Siema, jest to kwestia z głosem. Jeśli no niestety pan będzie na on. Excuse me, we have an IT guy, so if you could just...
10 minutes break, maybe we can switch up.
okay. To nie jest tutaj?
Wiesz co, to się tak z Teamsami nie do końca
Okej, dobra.
trzeba kilka razy kliknąć, więc wolę po prostu bezpośrednio, wiesz, w Teamsie.
Okay, so can you hear us? Anyone?
Yes, yes, we can.
So we can go back to our presentation. So now that we know who will be affected, I got one question on import of wine, but I believe that's anything that's should be answered was already answered, which means that if you want to avoid any additional obligations, just use non-reusable bottles and make it clear that these bottles are non-reusables. Well, I am aware of wine that is sold in Tetra Pak, which is not very popular and which is out of the scope. But if you do use aluminum cans, and I've also seen aluminum cans in the shops with wine, you will fall into the scope. There is also this idea of plastic cans. I would say that they also fall into the scope, but it's a little more complicated. But they are not very popular, so I don't think that is something that we should focus on right now. Okay, so if you are within the scope, how will you be affected, and what are your new obligations? First of all, the general obligation is meeting the collection rates. 77%, more and more restrictive up until 2029 when it's 90%. These rates are based on massive packaging of products placed on the market on the same year. The rates refer to plastics as in the SUP directive, but also to aluminum and to glass. They are based on the massive packaging of products placed on the same year. So this is something that may give us a little scope for, let's say, innovation when deciding if something should be sold in January or in December, depending on how our operator is dealing with the collection so far. And failure to meet the collection rates or to conclude the agreement results in obligation to pay a product fee. We don't know the exact amount of the product fee, but the general idea is that it is an administrative fine and it will be quite high. So we want to avoid the product fee, I would almost say at any costs. It's about the failure to meet the collection rates. You may have heard from the ministry that the participation in the deposit refund scheme is not obligatory. And it's nonsense. Because yes, the act says that you do not have to conclude the agreement with the operator and you do not have to participate in the system. You can skip that part and pay the product fee from the very beginning. Which yes, technically you can, but it's very costly and it's a penalty. So it makes absolutely no sense. Which means that you should choose an operator, you should conclude an agreement with him, and you should make sure that he meets the collection rates. If he doesn't, it's 50-50. He pays 50% of the product fee, you pay another 50%. The agreement itself must indicate financial contribution to the system and dates of payments, which means that the operator will distaff and you have to pay him. And it should be archived for the 5 years following the termination of the agreement. It's some administrative nuance that you should be aware of.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
This part makes me confusion.
Yeah.
I mean, we already pay a product fee, like producer or importer. So you can pay directly to the Voivodato, or you use a organization for collected.
It is something different. It's another product fee.
It's another product.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what you're speaking about. I mean, if I'm like importer, I decide to not participate in the deposit scheme. I'm still continue to the actual system, so paying the product fee to the Voivodato or through this agency that recollected the.
Yeah, because well, right now you have a contract with a recovery organization. if the recovery organization fails to meet the recycling rates, you pay the product fee for recycling rates, or you do not conclude the contract with the recovery organization and you pay the product fee directly, right? This is how things work right now. This one here, right now, as the draft says, is an addition. Regardless of the recycling rates, you have to meet the collection rates for the specific types of packaging. And if you fail to do that, pay the product fee or just pay the product fee from the very beginning. These are two separate product fees. Within the consultations, the public consultations of the draft, there were some voices that maybe two product fees is too much and the importers or producers should just focus on the collection rates. The ministry did not expressively said no. So it may happen that the specific packaging will be covered by only one product fee and only one rate. But it is something that may happen later. Right now, there is no such derogation. Two separate requirements, two separate product fees. Okay. Yeah. And then there are some additional formal requirements, which is that the contracted operator, the one that we choose to have an agreement with, should be indicated in our waste database as our representative, the same way that it works with recovery organizations. The contracted operator is responsible for filing the annual reports of his clients, just as with the recovery organizations. I, as an importer, will be obliged to provide my operator with all the necessary data, in particular with data on mass of the packaging placed in the market in the calendar year, again, similar to the current system. And I should label my bottles with the square that says kaucja, deposit, and the deposit rate, for example, 20 grosz or whatsoever. The draft has an annex which presents how this extra labeling should look like. So it should be visible. Just a square, kaucja, and amount of the deposit rate. This is something that we know that will apply. The question is, are there going to be any further labeling requirements, such as QR codes? Because that's how it works in Germany, and it makes sense, you know, if we use the reverse vending machines. And the draft says nothing about it. There were, again, market actors who wanted the ministry to directly say in the draft that the bottles should have a QR codes. Ministry said no. Ministry only wants us to use this single square, but as I've already said, the operators will apply for the permits to run the deposit-refund scheme. It is possible for the operator to demand that his clients do use the QR code. But we will not learn about it for next year, I guess. So right now, the only labeling requirement that is present in the draft is just the square with word kaucja and with the deposit rate. This is the producers and the importers. With the labeling, we will get back to that when discussing when the obligations come into force. But there are also distributors. I don't know if any of you is a distributor, but let's just take a look at that. Distributors are entrepreneurs running a retail or wholesale trade unit in which the end users are offered packaged beverages covered by a deposit refund scheme. Just to focus on that expressions. End users, as I mentioned, not necessarily consumers, but someone who buys the drink to use them. Wholesale trade units. The general idea is that if I have a wholesale and I sell something to the retailer, I am not a distributor covered by these obligations, but being a wholesale trade unit, I may sell stuff directly to end users. The basic example is a wedding. If I am having a wedding, I need a lot of vodka, so I will not just go to the retail store, I will go directly to the wholesaler. And if I am a wholesaler and I sell something to an individual who is not my business partner, I am treated like a retailer. And now there is a very important distinction. If my sales area is up to 200 square meters, I am just obliged to collect the deposit. I do not have to retake the bottle. I just take the deposits and that's all, more or less. If my sales area is more than 200 square meters, I am obliged to collect the deposit rate when I sell the bottle, but I'm also obliged to return the deposit, and I am obliged to collect empty packaging and waste packaging. It's formal differentiation because empty packaging is this, the reusable bottle. It's not waste, so it's packaging. Waste packaging is anything else. So it's not really much of a difference in practice, but I would just like to explain to you why I use the two terms. However, well, getting back to the main issue, if my sales area in a single unit is more than 200 square meters, I am a full-scale participant. If it's smaller, I am obliged to collect the deposits. I may want to do more, right? If I own a small shop, for example, in Warsaw, my bigger competitors will give the deposit back to the customers. So the customers will be more inclined to go there. So if I do not want to lose my customers, I will probably voluntarily meet the obligations anyway. But if it's not my problem, if I just have one, for example, shop in Warsaw with Spanish, Portugal, Italian food whatsoever, and I do not meet the 200 square meters limit, all I have to do is collect the deposit and not just, and that's basically all for me. There is a question about restaurants, because in the previous version of the Act, it was directly stated that the restaurants are not affected. Right now, there is no such derogation. So the whole question is if the restaurants meet this definition. Is it a retail trade unit in which the end users are offered packaged beverages covered by a deposit refund scheme? The safe answer is to assume that it is. The even safer answer is to try and ask the voivodeship marshal or maybe other authority, because there is a procedure in Poland when, if some obligation results in necessity for you to pay something to the budget, you can go and ask the authorities if you understand the provision correctly, and they say yes or no. It's a very useful tool. We do use it quite often recently, and it's something that is worth considering. However, I just noted that there is a doubt about the restaurants. It seems that the intention of the ministry is to have the restaurant participating in the scheme. Do the packaging have to be collected in the trade unit itself? The Act would suggest so. The ministry seems to allow for some derogations, but it's safer to collect them in the unit itself if it's a big problem and we would like to consider having some other contractor who would do that for us. There may be such a possibility, but it's not an easy answer, and it would require a little further research and further argumentation. And there's a thing of what returning the deposit mean. The provision itself suggests that returning the deposit is giving back the cash to any interested customer. Can I offer my customer a better alternative? Can I, for example, give him a discount? Yes, if he is willing to do that. But to me, it seems, and it is somehow confirmed by the ministry in the legislative documents, that there should always be an option of cash return. But basically, if it's just a discount on the next sale and the customer is okay with that, it should also be okay. But the thing is, we cannot really make it the only possible option for our customer. So again, as I said, these are the essence of the obligations of the distributors, but there are also some other things. The distributor is obliged to conclude an agreement with any interested operator, and it goes both ways. Both ways. I'm sorry. If I own a shop, I may apply to any of the operators who have a permit and say, I want to conclude a deal with you. Come, get my waste. And he is obliged to conclude an agreement with me. Now, this is a big thing, and it may change in the parliamentary level, but right now the draft says, if I have a shop, any operator that was granted a permit may come to me, demand that I give my collected waste to him, well, at least the waste from his products, and that I do the accounting of the deposit fee with him. So it will be a mess. Long story short, but yes, if I own a shop, right now the provisions will say that I have to conclude an agreement with any operator interested in doing so. The agreement should make the rules on settling the deposits, because the idea is that all the costs should be borne by the importers and producers. So for the shop owner, it should be basically neutral. Rules for collecting and passing packaging and the waste packaging, if such are collected in the specific units. And again, the agreements should be archived for 5 years following its termination. As a shop owner, if I do the things that are affected, I should keep a record on a number of deposit products bought and sold, a number of packaging and waste packaging returned by end users, amount of deposit collected, returned and not returned. And again, these records should be archived for the 5 following years. So this is something that might be a little problematic, but not really a big deal. Yeah, right. Just some additional accounting. As a distributor, I should place a visible information on condition and procedure of returning empty packaging and waste packaging and the possibility to get the deposit refund. So this again, if I own a retail store with some local cuisine in Warsaw or in any other Polish town, just place the piece of paper saying that there is something like the deposit refund system and what rights do my clients have. It's basically that the easiest way to do that is to just rewrite the respective provisions of the act. The question is, should I obtain a collection permit? Because I technically will be collecting waste from my customers. The answer is no, because there is a provision on unprofessional collectors who are not obliged to obtain such permit. And there is the fun question, because should I report the mass of collected waste to the municipality? My answer is maybe, because it's highly unclear. From the administrative point of view, the shops will be more or less treated like an entrepreneur who buys maculature or scrap from the market, right? So if I want to make some money, I can open a place and pay local people to bring me scrap. I pay the money, I get the scrap, I am a waste collector, and I have some obligations. One of these obligations is to report to the municipality how much scrap I collected, so that the municipality could also fulfill its own obligations. I will do more or less the same as a retailer. So the question is, should I file the same report as the scrap collector? The safe option is yes. The ministry right now just suggests that someone should file such report. But does not directly indicate who. So it's either the shop owner or someone contracted by the operator. If I am the shop owner, I should for sure make that 100% clear with the operator if this is something that stays on me or if he takes care of that to avoid any further doubts. So yeah, that was the key part, and some final remarks. There are some other unknowns. The deposit rates, how much will the deposit be? No idea. It will be settled by the ministry in a regulation. Right now, we just know it's no higher than 2 zlotys. I will guess that it will not be higher than 1 zloty, but they just have to make the upper limits in the act. We have no idea on the fee rates. They will also be set on by the ministry, and they will be no higher than 25 zlotys, around 5 euros right now, per each missing kilogram. So if we are talking about thousands of kilograms, it would be 5 euros times 1,000. Again, the main conclusion is that would be a lot, probably not 25 zlotys, but again, 10 zlotys is quite possible. 5 zlotys is already a lot if you refer that to each and every kilogram. Value added tax for unreturned deposits. Ministry declares that it will be derogated, but there is no clear rule. Well, okay, there are rules on that. And the rules on that is that the tax is due for the unreturned deposit. So if you buy, for example, a beer and you take a look at your receipt, it says that the bottle can be returned for the next 50 years. Why? To make sure that the value added tax may be due in the next 50 years, definitely not now. This is something that is used in practice right now. It may not be so easy when the deposit-refund scheme comes into force. So there is some form of settling this is required. The ministry declares that it will be settled somehow, but it does not put it in the draft. And the last important unknown is the deposit payment. The Act says directly that I should collect the deposits from the end user. It does not refer anyhow to the whole supply chain, right? Because as far as I know, for the reusable bottles right now, the deposit just goes through the whole supply chain from the producer to the shop owner. I may be wrong on that, but it basically may work just as the value-added tax, right? Or it may not. And this is one of the things that will be decided probably by the operator. So the operator may demand the deposit payments on the whole supply chain if he thinks that he can enforce that on his customers, or he may not. This is something we will just see in the future. And since we are talking about the future, the timeline. The date that the law will be adopted is unknown. It will be definitely approved by the Council of Ministers in the following week, but then it will have to go through the Senate, probably same again, and be signed by the President, and probably previously it would have to be notified to the European Commission. So it's not something that will happen very soon. My educated guess is probably spring 2023, maybe maybe March. That's my guess when the act will be finished and will enter into force. It will enter into force formally 1 month after the promulgation date. So they already dropped the 1st of January 2023. They probably aim at that date, but not gonna happen. Well, at least that's what I think. Anyway, the obligations will enter into force very soon. But first collection rates apply from 2025. And as I mentioned, the whole idea of this system is to make sure that the collection rates are met. We would pay the product fee for not meeting the collection rates. The operators are there basically to meet the collection rates. So the systems will probably start to operate around 2025. Between now and between the promulgation date and entry into force and 2025, it will be something in between, which is also quite complex. But we can now take the assumption that the system will start no later than 2025. The intertemporal provision is quite complex, and it says that packaging used for placing beverages on the market directly before the date of joining a deposit return system can be used up to their consumption, return on or exhaust of supplies, and deposit for such packagings is not collected, which is quite a funny thing because already in 2023, the provisions will be in force. They will say, for example, that as a shop owner, I have to collect the deposit or I will be punished by an administrative fine. But in this provisional term of 2023 and 2024, it all depends on the date of joining a deposit return system. The date of joining is when I conclude an agreement with the operator. Before I conclude the agreement with the operator, I can put the products in the market and not care about that. I can even make a little stock to be used later. But after I do that, all the administrative obligations apply to me. And the even funnier part, if I am a shop owner, I have to get the deposits and collect the bottles from my customers if these bottles come from a producer who has already concluded an agreement with the operator. Which is, it's the first time I've seen something like that in the law. Any of you? Yeah. So it's the first time any of us heard of something like that. The conclusion is, formally, the system will come into force in first half of 2023. It will definitely be into force, and all the obligations will apply from 2025. In between, the obligations on both importers and producers and the retailers will start to apply depending on the date when an importer or a producer concludes an agreement with the operator. First operators will probably come to living in late 2023. That's my guess. So right now, basically nothing changes for the next few months. The moment that the first operators are authorized, if we are importer or a producer, it depends on us when we want the obligations to apply. And the annual reports are to be filled for the first year of systems operation, which basically is 2025, but it may be maybe sooner. Suggestions and recommendations, that's the last thing on my presentations. Basically, verifying the possibility to avoid the status of entity placing packaged beverages on the market. If I'm not interested, the easiest way, use non-reusable glass bottles, if this one stands in the final version of the act. Other thing, if my main company is somewhere abroad, just pick my, let's say, importer in Poland and make sure it's his problem. This is one of the solutions. And key decision is choosing the right operator, right? Because if I'm a retailer, I do not have this freedom of choice, but if I'm an importer, I do. Key factors are the lowest price, obviously, and the highest chance to meet the collection rates. Because if they are not met, I have to pay the part of the product fee. It may be important to choose the operator who can guarantee me access to the raw materials, in particular if I am a producer of plastic bottles, of products in plastic bottles, right? The labeling requirements, they also may depend on the operator, and also it's maybe something important to me to have or not have any additional labeling requirements. And there's the matter of civil responsibility, or the 50% of the product fee, right? Because administratively, the authorities will demand 50% from my operator and 50% from me. But maybe I may find an operator who will agree on civil responsibility. So yes, I will be punished with the product fee by the authorities, but this product fee will be refunded to me by the operator. It already works like that with some of the recovery organizations, and this might be something worth considering when choosing the operator. And there is this issue of universal and equal access, which basically means that all the operators should treat me, even if I am a small importer, just as if I was their main shareholder. They should offer me the same terms of the contract, which is something that should be, again, worth remembering during the negotiations. And there's the other thing, which is the setting the optimal dates of joining a deposit refund system. The obvious answer is to wait as long as possible, not to get any additional obligations too soon, right? But yes and no. First thing is, of course, the possibility to restock the storehouses before concluding an agreement. Because the provision that I've just quoted says that if I restock something, if I've already produced it, I can use it up. Yeah, that's all. So the obligations apply to basically new products that are placed on the market after I've concluded an agreement with the operator. So for a particular entity, it might be reasonable to make sure that the storehouses are full in the dates of signing the agreement. But the other thing which is worth considering is that the collection rates are referred to the packaging placed on the markets in the same year. In all of the other systems, it's more reasonable, which means that on the 1st of January, I already know what are my targets for this year. Here, it's far from being reasonable, because I have that information on the fly. You know, if, For example, in December, if in December, because it's Christmas and people buy more stuff, so I sell more stuff, this basically means that my operator in December learns that he have to collect more packaging waste, which will be problematic, which definitely and for sure will be problematic. So this is the key decision to should I sell stuff in January or should I sell stuff in December to make sure that my collection rates are being met. And in particular case, it might be reasonable to start the system in 2024 or even in 2023 to make sure that I get a little bit of freedom of deciding which packaging is formally placed into the markets on the markets each year. And that's, oh, okay. And for retailers and wholesalers, sales area of the smaller area, the access to the system in anything more than collecting the deposits is voluntary. It might be worth considering if I want to be competitive and if I have larger competitors who do offer the deposits return. Again, negotiating contractors with the operators, it's really unusual solution in the law because both parties are obliged to enter the contract with the other one under a threat of administrative fine, but the law does not specify the terms of such contract. So the negotiating positions of both parties are strong. It will be fun to see how it works in practice. Again, there's a general rule of universal and equal access to which we can always refer to. And it's a strong recommendation to make sure with the operator that we are on the same page on who makes the reports to the municipality. And that's all. Thank you for your attention. The handsome gentleman on the right is myself. The handsome gentleman on the left is Timon Grabarczyk, whom you already met. Claudia somehow did not catch up to this to the photo slide, but it's a mistake that will be occurring in the future.
Also because she's the more beautiful, she doesn't have this of that.
Exactly. It would just lower our level of beauty within the comparison. However, again, as I've said, we are dealing with environmental law, much broader, water law, soil contamination whatsoever. Timon here is an expert on water law issues. I personally deal mostly with the waste law and with the extended producer responsibility. If you have any questions, please be sure to contact us. If you have any more complex questions that may require further cooperation, please be sure to contact us even more, because that's how we earn our bread, with solving other people's problems. And that's all more or less. Thank you for your participation. If you have any further questions, that's the right moment. Nothing? I will just check the chats. And there is something or not? Excuse me. No further questions. So thank you very much. Okay, do you want to add anything at the end?
No, it's okay.
It's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.